Paris, thanks so much. You can hear me and you can also see the screen. I hope everybody else can. If not, please drop uh, the information to the chat. So, like Paris just said, he's been working with Red Fortress and myself for 10 years. Been very fortunate to have him. And in fact, he was helping out even with preparing some of this presentation. So I appreciate that. So, like Paris said, I'm also a client of Red Fortress Property Management. One of the things I was just going to mention to you is that I serve actually on two national committees. One is financial, the other one is certification. And recently, actually yesterday, I had the chance to start working with another property management company up in the great state of Pennsylvania, and they're looking at getting their national designation. So now I'm starting to help audit management companies around the United States get what Red Fortress has, which is a CRMC designation and national designation. So that was also kind of exciting. And also on Friday this week, I'm going to be setting up a board meeting to become again president of local chapter because the current president basically was resigned. They couldn't do the function. So again, I'm trying to help build the professionalism in our industry in the area. So I'm going to be taking over as president again for the sixth time. So it's kind of exciting, I guess. And so I just thought I'd share with our clients what's happening with me as well. And like Parrish was saying, I'm a client, a property manager, a landlord. So everything that I'm going to talk about today affects me as well as an investor. And I also want to point out that, again, we're very fortunate to be ranked number one by two separate agencies. And so, without further ado, what I want to make sure that I kind of get going on this presentation because I don't want to keep you. I know it's valuable your time. And some of this, though, is pretty interesting. So, upcoming, we're going to talk a bit about the national sales. What's happening nationally with our sales? Also, what's happening rental-wise with the multifamily and single-family home industries nationally. Then we're going to bring it down again to our local economy. And what most of you are also interested in, just like myself, I was interested in what's happening with the numbers for the rental analysis for our second quarter in 2026 for Southwest Florida. Couple of surprises, but you're going to have to wait for it. And then also online marketing, what's happening a little bit with Zillow and some of the changes that they're doing. What does Red Fortress actually see? Because now we have 550 units in the local marketplace, so we really get a very good gauge as to what's happening. And then also we have what's happening with our marketing. So without further ado, I'm going to start off with the first part. So here's some recent financial news. Like some of it actually literally happened today. So one of the things that happened, and the Fed has had a recent meeting, is they're talking about looking at inflation as the key indicator for them in terms of whether they're going to raise or lower the interest rates nationally. And so the reason why they say that is because kind of like the economy in terms of unemployment at being at 4.2 and how many people are entering the workforce and that is kind of stabilized. But what they're looking at is inflation, right? And so today, literally today, as some of you might have heard about it, that the inflation for June was down by 0.4%. So that's the consumer index. And so the pricing index, CPI. And so right now, overall, for the year, it's been 3.5. Now, if you've seen some of the other Zoom, ones that I've done, and I've talked about the federal bank and how it views things, they try to keep the inflation around 2%. But the problem is that with the oil fluctuating because of things like the war in Iran, it's kind of been up and down. Okay, so right now, the very good news today that the inflation rate's down to 3.5% annually. Monthly, it's down by 0.4%. So things actually decreased, probably because, again, the lower gas prices that were in June. And in other news as well, we found out that the national sales by the National Association of Realtors, it fell by 2.4% in June. And here's what's also interesting about that. For the last 36 months in a row, or 3 years, the average home has continued to climb. And probably that's because of inflation and to a lesser extent tariffs now, because tariffs have been kind of baked in for a little while now. So it's also interesting. So what we're basically seeing right now is, again, a little bit of sliding in national sales. And so I wanted to bring to you a couple of slides that I thought was kind of a little bit interesting because I pull a lot of data together. And here's the first slide that I'm going to show to you. And this is talking about the 2019 versus 2020 21 sales listings. So why go back so far? Well, remember 2021 is kind of like the year of COVID where there was a lot of overheating of the sales market. Okay. And so what happened was this Resi Club, Lance Lambert, was trying to show a couple of interesting facts here. So when we're looking at Southwest Florida down here, you notice that this area was brown. And what that meant is that the inventory in 2021 prior to COVID was actually lower than 2019. So 2019 in June, we have X amount of properties, and then COVID hits, 2021 type of things with the heating of the market, and you can see that there was less properties in the market in Southwest Florida in 2021 versus 2019. Okay, now the next slide we're going to look at for sales is you're going to see now we're going to compare today, June of 2026 to 2019 sales listings. And you can see down here, we've got a couple of interesting things to look at here. So first of all, if you look at Lee County, it's a light kind of green. What they're saying is that there's more sales listings today than back in 2019. Again, why is this? Well, just showing that back before kind of COVID happened and in our area, Ian and Helene and Milton, they're saying that today we have more sales listings than we did back in 2019. And also, if you look just down around here, right where the red is, and I'm pointing out in Southwest Florida, like say in Charlotte County and so forth, there's a lot more listings. What's interesting is that now in Collier County, you can see that's a kind of a light tannish color is saying that they have a little less listings in 2026 in June compared to 7 years ago. So what does that kind of mean ultimately? So next slide we're going to show in sales, they're showing the median days on the market pending for May. This is the last time they had it. So you can see here in Southwest Florida, the size of the circle represents the population, okay? But then this tan area, the worse it gets, is tan. So blue is great. You're selling stuff right away. Here you're seeing it's basically 50 days or longer in Southwest Florida. So just to see what nationally they're saying, is that it's taking a lot longer for properties to sell. We kind of understand that, and maybe what's possibly happening, maybe it's the time to start investing because properties are taking longer to sell. Okay. Another interesting thing that I thought I would point out to with regards to sales is they were talking about the Florida turnover. Okay, so Florida turnover. So what are they talking about? So people that are in homes right now, to what extent are they kind of moving to different homes, like buying different homes. And, Florida is a little bit more transient than the nation at 4.4%, meaning, 4.4% of people that are living in a home are moving to another one for sales versus 3.4% in the United States. So we're a little bit higher than national. But the next slide, I'm really interested in showing you for a couple of different reasons. And what this next slide is talking about is we've heard about congressional legislation that recently passed, the Save Our Homes Act. I won't get into all of that and all the bureaucratic changes and stuff like that and the regulations that they're doing. But what this was talking about is it was a survey of major investors, 100 plus units. What did they think about this market? Like, are they investing more in it? This is prior to the SAVE Act even coming into existence. And without further ado, here's how they're looking at it. This was a little bit shocking for those people. So they were talking about again, hey, are you going to be investing more in the single family home market or the build to rent? So build to rent basically means with the idea that a developer is building homes, a group of homes, and with the entire idea of not selling it but renting it out. So sometimes they're doing it a little bit more on a more economic scale so that they can rent it out right away. Sometimes they do it themselves. Sometimes they might have somebody rent it out for them. So that's what they're talking about. So builders looking to either rent, that sort of thing, invest. And look at this, 50% say they plan in the next month to decrease their investment, another 30% somewhat. So 80% of the big institutional investors are saying that they're going to be investing less in our marketplace nationally. Okay. Obviously, Southwest Florida could be a little bit different. So it's interesting because this is in line with what I talked about almost 10 months ago when I was at a property management conference. There were about 20 other property managers on the east coast of Florida. And I asked Lance Lambert, the owner and founder of Resi Club, I said, hey, listen, what's happening with the institutional investors today? That was it almost a year ago. And he said, hey, listen, they've actually been peeling back in 2025. So now we see that even through the rest of 2026, the major groups are not investing like they used to. And this is even before the Congressional Act passed. In fact, what I read recently was that the eight largest institutional investors for single family homes actually sold over 3,000 um, single family homes more than they actually bought. So they're actually starting to shed properties. Okay. Um, will that continue? Will the Save Our Homes Act, which is basically trying to cap the limits of how much institutional investors can buy, will that have an effect? We'll see what's happening because it just came into existence in the last, I think, week or so. So, having said that, talked a little bit, gave you a lot of information about what's happening nationally with sales. Parish, how are we doing? How are things looking? Are there any questions right now, or should I get into a little bit more of the rental data?
No questions yet. You're still doing good.
No questions yet. All right, guys. So at any moment, again, you could put it in the chat. I know there's a lot of information, so kind of absorb it. I have a lot of information to give to you guys, but I want to make sure that you guys understand it. Okay. So great. So the next thing that I wanted to do is talk a little bit more about the second part. What's happening with the multifamily? What's happening with the single family at a national level? And then we'll get more into what we see at our local level, which obviously affects you and I and everyone more so. So let's talk about the multifamily rental analysis. And again, the big thing to remember about rental analysis is when we're dealing with the multifamily is that multifamily often precedes what we see nationally in the single family. So that's why it's kind of important. So you have a single family home. Why is this relevant? Well, when we start to see different things happen with the multifamily, then maybe 6 months or a year later, you often see it happen in the single family. So let's talk with the first graph. We're talking about the rental analysis. We're talking about rent growth, but blended rent growth. Okay. So what do we mean by that? Blended rent growth is when you take the new move-in rent and you also take in what's happening with the renewal rents and you blend it all together. Okay. And so we see all the way down here, we see a little bit in Q2, a little bit better on the national level for a blended rent. Okay, so that's certainly not fantastic. We're not seeing this huge rebound, but again, you're kind of coming in here, which is slightly a bit above the first quarter blended rent growth and kind of in line with what it was 6 months ago. Okay, so that's a little bit of a good idea. Also, how are we doing with occupancy? Okay, so also here, when you're looking at the multifamily, you can see that there's a little bit of a trend up. Okay, so it's a little bit higher than last quarter, which is good. But keep in mind that this last quarter was the lowest in 9 years. Okay, so glad we're going up, but exactly we haven't really gone crazy and started to recover entirely when it comes to the multifamily industry. So they're still sitting around 92.5%, far from where they were like 95.5% back when we were looking at like the high point of during the COVID era. Okay, and then interesting thing that I took from this as well is I'll end with this with the multifamily. We're looking at now new move-in rent growth. So again, remember we were talking about blended renewals, which tends to be normally a little bit higher than new move-in, especially when we're in a down market. So when you're taking a look at these numbers for the last several years, almost 3 years, there's only been one or two times where there's been any type of new move-in rental increases. So in other words, when somebody moves out for $1,500, are you putting it back on the market for slightly more like 1,550 as an example? Well, there was 1% here, uh, 1% here back in 2024. Then you can see it kind of goes almost flat lines to almost nothing. And you can see very often for the last, say, year, there's actually been a negative between 1 and 2% growth, meaning that if somebody were renting a property for 1,500, they might be now offering the new person 1,475. But luckily, this seems to be getting a little bit better over the last quarter. So now we're flatlining, meaning, hey, maybe they're going to start offering less incentives, lowering the rents at the multifamily level nationally. Okay. So having said that, Parrish, are we okay? Any questions right now, or shall I get into the single family home?
No questions in the chat. You're all
All
clear.
right. Some of you guys are veterans, so I'm glad that you're here. See some familiar faces, so that's great to have you guys back. All right, so let's talk about the single family home industry and what's happening at the national level. Okay, so here we're going to talk about the blended rent growth again, and here what they're talking about is, hey, kind of like it went down in May. So the second quarter kind of like started to increase and then it went down. So they're kind of saying we're getting a little bit of mixed signals here. So yes, kind of like the second quarter is a little bit higher than the first quarter, but barely. And we kind of took a seat back in May. So they're kind of like saying, hey, what's going to happen nationally for single family homes when it comes to the next quarter? Okay. And then the next thing, slide that we're going to look at is seasonally adjusted occupancy rates. Okay, so what they mean by that is, depending on where you are in the nation, sometimes they adjust things like up north where February might not be a great month for move-ins because they might be getting snowed under. But like for Florida, for instance, we do have a lot of people moving into units because we don't have that situation. So that's what they mean about seasonally adjusted. And so what they're showing right now is again, kind of like it looked kind of okay and then a downward path in May. So when you're looking at it quarterly, it looks like it's coming right in line with the first quarter of 2026. So, it's kind of like flatline there for occupancy. So it's not really going up at all, but it's at least it's not going down. You can see recovery last quarter over the fourth quarter of 2025. But here's the thing, you have to kind of go back about 14 years here as I move all the way across back to 2013 for it to be a lower occupancy. So again, it's kind of flatlined, but at least it's not going down. So that's a good thing. And another slide I thought I'd share with you at the national level, they're talking about year over year in May. What does that look like? Well, they said, hey, in 2025, in May, it was like not good. It was like the worst they had in like, 12 years or 13 years. At least we've improved on that. But we haven't even matched, 2 years ago. Okay, so again, some improvement that we're seeing, but not necessarily great. But at least there's improvement, guys. Okay, days on the market, which is obviously an important aspect. How long is it taking average properties? And again, we're talking nationally here, not talking local, nationally here. You're still seeing at the national level, it's almost at 45 days on the market, which is like massive. Like still we're in this high area in the last 7 years. So it came down by maybe 1 day or 2 days from last like quarter, but it's still really elevated. Okay. So it's down a bit from the highest ever, so that's good news. But it's not exactly coming down very very quickly right now. And again, when they're looking at the days on market, when they were comparing it to May, they were saying on average that when you look at prior to COVID, when you look at these 2020, 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, on average, it looked about 25 days on market nationally to rent the single family home. Well, right now it's 39. 39. So it's literally 14 days longer. Okay. So again, when we're looking at this data nationally, and then we're going to compare it shortly to what's happening in our area, you can see a little bit of what's happening. And then finally, like I showed you with an initial slide before, what we're looking at here is the investor demand. So what are we looking at with investors, typically larger investors? What are they looking at doing in terms of buying single family homes in the area? Well, you can see right here, since about COVID, you can see that the investor demand has kind of gone down and it hasn't changed. You can see right now that when we're looking at in the second quarter, it's actually quite low, lowest on record in about 14 years. So again, when we talk about the current climate, whether it's what people think about interest rates, whether we talk about the Save Our Homes Act, the congressional legislation to ensure that the average person can buy a single family home versus having large corporate entities with billions of dollars buying it and maybe driving up the price of homes. So they're looking, both the Trump administration and Congress are always looking at trying to make homes affordable for the average person. Okay, I'm not sure whether all of this is driving, maybe a little bit tariffs in there, but again, the tariffs, they've been around for a little while now, so they've probably kind of run its course in terms of building, and the expense that's been added to building. So I'm not sure what's driving all of this. It could be all three elements. But really, what's happening now is that there's not a lot of people buying institutionally, at the national level. So that means that the homes are more affordable to buy. So having said that, getting ready to go into a little bit more of the local economy. Parish, how are we doing?
You're doing great.
Doing great. Okay, no questions. Again, I can take questions at the end as you guys maybe think some of this through. So let's talk a little bit about the Southwest Florida economy now and what's happening. I always like to kind of show you, hey, what's happening with our local area because again, real estate is localized, right? Some of it has to do nationally with interest rates and what's happening. Certainly, when you have foreign wars and stuff like that, that can have an effect on a lot of things. But again, what's happening locally is very, very important with unemployment and discretionary income. So taking a look at the Southwest Florida, again, this is coming from our local university that does real estate data. And so let's talk about the unemployment rate right now. It actually went down from April to May. It went down by zero point 0.2, so we're down to 5.5%. So that's good to hear. So more people are working in our area. Single family home permits, they were talking about from May of a year ago to May now, declined by 8%. So this is very important. So when we're in a down market, when we have a large oversupply, it's very important that we start slowing that supply rate, right? Because we know that people are going to be moving into the area on average more than moving out, right? Especially as housing becomes more affordable. We want to try to limit what we're putting on in the supply, and then that's going to help, the housing prices and rents recover. They talk about home sales increased by 4%, and that's in terms of the number of sales. They also talked about the three coastal counties. That's Collier, Lee, I'm sorry, and Charlotte. So Lee, Collier, and Charlotte, they've kind of increased the rates that they've sold properties at. Again, typically you would probably think of it because of inflation. And then they're also talking about the number of listings are down 19%. So that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure whether some of the listings are down because now they've come on the rental market because they couldn't sell for what they wanted to. So again, like we talked about, we're going to see how these numbers shake out. And then they talked about the Florida consumer sentiment. It's still doing pretty well, but it went down by 1.8, probably because of things like, the average gas prices increasing and so forth in the last month. Okay, so this is the local Florida economy. So again, great to hear that unemployment is down. What that will do is over time, it will mean that more people are able to afford rental properties as well as sales. Okay, and it will affect the overall real estate. So getting into the 2026 numbers, for those of you that love numbers, you're going to love this next slide. Some of you, you're going to start getting a little bit overwhelmed. So it's okay. I'm going to synthesize some of this data. So now we're getting into what's happening here locally in the rental market. And you'll see across here, you have January, February, March, April, May, and June. So the 6 months or the first half year of 2026 here. Down the side here, you're going to see cities, Fort Myers, Cape Coral, Lehigh, Port Charlotte, Naples, and Bonita. Okay, now here's what's really important about this data. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit of a graphic form, what this looks like, but here's what you really need to take from this. Why, first of all, do I choose single family homes or townhomes? Because when you're looking at the rental market, and you're looking at three bedrooms is the most sought after asset for rent. Nothing wrong with one, two, or four bedrooms, but pound for pound, the average person wants a three-bedroom home or a three-bedroom townhome. Nothing wrong with apartments, nothing wrong with condos, but the two main drivers in a real estate market are single family homes, three bedrooms, or single family homes, townhomes. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. So if those numbers are going up, chances are everything else, like the two and one bedrooms, are going up as well. Okay. So when we look at this, this is the total numbers by city. And then as this number gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time, what's going to happen is that people are going to realize, hey, I can't rent my property for $2,100. I'm lowering it by $100 to 2,000. So go from 2,100 to 2,000, and that's what adds to this number. And then the same thing with these guys. As time goes on, and in Fort Myers, they say, hey, listen, my home's not renting at $1,900. I'm going to decrease it. And then you get into this range. So this is what happens over time. You go from just the total three bedrooms to 2,000 or less, and then to $1,700 or less. So here's what you see over time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to break down slides graphically so you don't have to look at this number. If you want to take a screenshot of this, again, you're going to be able to see this on our website at redfortresspm.com under the blog section. It'll be up in the next 4 days or so. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some graphic representation of each of these. And the first one we're going to do is we're going to talk about Fort Myers and Cape Coral. Again, these are the exact same numbers. I'm just, instead of showing you just the raw numbers, I'm going to show you a little bit more of what it looked like graphically. Now, for those of you that were here in the first quarter, we were starting to see some good results. I said, hey, guys, listen, there's always this like in-season effect, like January and February. Some people are coming down from up north to escape, like say, blizzards and cold weather. They want to, get a suntan, that sort of stuff. It happens every year, right? People from all over the world. And I said, watch the effect of what happens in January and February. It doesn't matter what city it is. Let's see what happens in the second quarter, because now people have gone back, like say in March or April, and we might see some effects. So when you look at Fort Myers, and the light blue here is the total number of three bedrooms. You can see that there's kind of a peak, then it goes down, and now it's kind of started to slide back up. Same thing with Cape Coral. It started at 1,033 in January. All of a sudden, it goes down to 777 in May, and whoop, all of a sudden, it starts for whatever reason to go back up. Okay, when you're looking at these two major areas, Fort Myers and Cape Coral being kind of like the big ones in the area compared to say Port Charlotte or Bonita Springs, certainly. You'll see another trend here. So when you're looking at the second column for each of these are the $2,000 or a month or less rental properties. And again, you want to see these numbers just like anything else go down. So you see that it starts to go down here in Fort Myers, and then right around April, it gets to a low of 130 properties, but now all of a sudden up to 144 in May, 163 in June. So what's happening? It means that these guys are starting to lower the rent to 2,000 or less. Take a look at the 1,700 in Fort Myers, 64 properties, $1,700 or less. It goes down to 28 only in February. What happens from there? March up to 57, April 47, May 62, June now 72. So you can see that there's this increasing of people saying, hey, my properties are not renting, my three bedrooms not renting. I want to lower it and get it rented. And now you're starting to see the numbers in Fort Myers creep up at the $1,700 a month rent. And then the same thing with Cape Coral. You see $2,000 a month in rent or less. Starts off at 411 in January, then it goes down. 322 in February, 281 in March, 268 in April, 271 in May, and now it's up to 332, more than the previous 5 months. And then the same thing with $1,700 a month properties or less. 161 in June, or excuse me, January. We go to 138, 102 in March, 89 in April, 99 in May. We're feeling good, and now it's ticking back up to 112 in June. All right, let's take a look at some other places in Lehigh. And Lehigh, okay, guys, Lehigh is by far the worst metric area in Southwest Florida, by far. And here's why. When you look at all of these numbers, the total number of three bedrooms, the total number of three bedrooms for rent 2,000 or less, or the total number of three bedrooms for rent 1,700, they're all up. They're all up. So the supply is outstripping the demand, and as opposed to where you were starting to see some other places where it kind of went down and came back up, not really that much luck in Lehigh. So they start off with 800 in January. It started to go down slightly, and then all of a sudden now it's at 834 in June. 431 properties for rent, three bedrooms, 2,000 or less. Now it's at 494. And in January, it was 149 properties, three bedrooms for rent, 1,700 or less. Now it's at 201. So yes, it was a little bit of a dip in February, but not even anymore. You can see even in May, it's starting to pull up, and June. Okay, Port Charlotte's a little bit interesting because Port Charlotte, just like Naples, always had a very consistent base, especially given its size. And so you can see in Port Charlotte, a little bit of good news here. You can see it started off total three bedrooms, 337, down to 326 in February, 278 in March, 277, 258, and now 255. So you can see, as opposed to something where Lehigh and Fort Myers and Cape Coral, you can see that every month the number of inventory is decreasing a little bit in Port Charlotte. What's really interesting is, if you want to look at, and not getting into the numbers too far here, but the $1,700 a month or less. So you're looking at it 76 in January down to 72 in February, 61 in March, 51 in April, 51 in May, 35 in June. So in other words, if you're a consumer and you're in Port Charlotte, you're now seeing that the average number of three bedrooms, 1,700 or less available for rent, marketing wise, is now down to 35 only. This is how, in an area, as those $1,700 a month units start to recede, there's less and less inventory, and that's where you can start seeing the demand outstrip the supply. And now it's starting to get a little bit more at the bottom level. And maybe I'll take your questions in a second here. Naples, okay, and Bonita Springs, again, very expensive kind of area for a lot of different reasons. You can see that there's almost none in the 2000 or 1700 range. You can see a little bit here, 5, 5, 5, 8, 7, 5. So there's a little bit. It barely even shows up in Naples. Same thing with Bonita Springs, 2000 and less over time is 3, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So again, Bonita Springs is a smaller area, but not really having any type of affordable three bedrooms, 2000 or less. But here's how are the numbers doing. Again, in Naples, you're seeing it started off the year 1,272. It decreased a little bit over time, and now it kind of picked up again, just like Fort Myers and Cape Coral, to 1,183. Bonita Springs had an increase at the beginning of the year, and now it's kind of like decreased, and it's up to 183 three bedrooms on the rental market. So even in Bonita Springs and Naples, even though they don't have like lower end rentals, so to speak, like 2,000 or less a month, but you're still seeing that kind of slip. Like, hey, we had a lot in January, kind of went down maybe in February and March and April, and now you're starting to see some May and June coming on the market. So why? Possibly because, again, the homes did not sell. A lot of people are looking at selling their homes in November and December. Maybe they sign, 5 or 6 months. They don't get the offers that they want. Now they're starting to maybe put them back on the market for rent. So, and I'm going to give you one other slide, and then I'll start taking your analysis and your questions, and hopefully this is making sense. So I'm trying to synthesize a lot of data for you guys here, but here is something that's exciting. It's a different type of graphic. It's the year over year in June. So let's not talk about the properties in 2026. Let's talk about what happened in June of 2025 compared to June of 2026, apples to apples, year over year. So here's a little bit of what's interesting. When you look at the breakdown of three bedrooms in Fort Myers, and again, that same stratification of 2,000 or less, 1,700 or less, what you're seeing is that actually year over year, Fort Myers actually decreased by 88 rental properties, three bedrooms. Now, again, they're higher end, but still a little less on the market. So they went from 697 properties to 609. Here's the thing, and why I comment on the values of rent are sliding in Fort Myers. What's happening with the quote lower end rentals, the cheaper rentals at three bedrooms at 1,700 or less? You go from 24 to 72. Okay, so what that means is, just like the 2000, you're having people not being able to rent and they're lowering the rent. It's natural. Nobody wants their property to sit off the rental market for 4 months, 6 months. So the one of the ways that you do it is naturally is lower the rent. So just like we had 107, 2000 or less, 163 now, it increased 57 properties. So in other words, year over year, we have 56 more properties on the market, 2,000 or less in Fort Myers, and 48 1,700 or less. All right. Now, Cape Coral, this is the big shock. Cape Coral started to see lessening of the number of properties. So this is very, very good. You had 1,371 three bedrooms for rent in June of 2025, down to 818, a difference of 553 rental properties. Very good news for you as a landlord and as an investor in terms of the value of your property increasing, right? Thing is that what's even better about Cape Coral is the number of 2,000 or less three-bedroom properties went down. That's very good. Again, 414. It started off a year ago. Today, in June of 2026, it went to 332. So it decreased 82. However, this is why I say it's adjusting. The number of 1,700 or less three-bedroom went from 60 to 112. So it increased by 52. So Cape Coral was very odd, just like to some extent Port Charlotte, where you're seeing that there's this adjustment that the number of properties is declining, the number of 2,000 or less properties are declining, and you're seeing the 1,700 or less properties increasing. That's because the market's adjusting. You're starting to see that the supply and the demand are kind of catching up to each other, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next quarter. Does the number of properties, three bedroom, that are 1,700 or less, do they actually start decreasing in Cape Coral? Okay, Cape Coral was kind of some good news there. Lehigh, like I said, not so much. When I put here depression like, and I'm not talking about economically, I'm talking a little bit more about emotionally, that if you have a property for rent in Lehigh, a little bit tougher time right now because the number of properties increased year over year by 53. So not a huge amount, but still it didn't go down. The number of 2,000 or less rental properties that are three bedroom or less increased by 170 from 324 to 494. That's a lot. Okay, that's a lot. That's like a 50% increase. So you can see where the average person is it has having to adjust because of the supply. And then also, this is kind of insane. 70 units for available for rent, three bedrooms at 1,700 or less, 201 now. So that was an increase almost of 200%. So here's what's happening in Lehigh. There hasn't been a shortage of supply. The demand has not caught up to the supply in Lehigh, and that's why every category you're still seeing it sliding. And that's why I'm saying, like, you're going to see three bedrooms homes, not just 1,700, not just 1,600, but you see 1,500, 1,400 until they get rented because nobody wants a property on the market for rent over time. I know I don't as a landlord. Port Charlotte, very similar to Cape Coral, 123 less properties year over year available for rent, and also 16 less 2,000 or month or rental rates that are less. So that's good. So 16 down, that's good. And 1,700, you can see it's almost holding the line. It goes from 30 to 35. So it's a little bit of an increase, but barely. Again, just like Cape Coral, especially for Cape Coral, I'm looking at like Port Charlotte. Hey, are you going to be the first area in Southwest Florida to actually go down in all three categories, year over year? So we'll see. As soon as that starts happening, now you're really reaching the bottom and you're expecting the rental rates and the real estate values to come back up in Port Charlotte. Naples, again, we talked about it. They're down 274 properties for rental year over year. So that's good. And 2,000 or less, there hasn't been any change. It went from four properties to five. That's okay. That's negligible. So Naples, they're starting to have a little less inventory, and same thing with Bonita Springs. It went from 207 to 183, and now we're down by 24 overall. So again, Bonita Springs having a little bit less inventory right now. So having said that, I'll take a pause. A lot of numbers. Cape Coral and Port Charlotte showing some signs of improvement. Lehigh, I'm sorry, the numbers aren't there yet. There's still unfortunately more adjusting that has to go down for Lehigh before I guess we see those numbers go up. So, Parrish, how are we doing? Any questions that I can answer?
There's no questions in the chat as of right now.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Okay. So we have now coming up in this we're looking at the opposite way. Okay, we're going to talk about how low can you go? What does the low end rental property market look like? So we've talked about three bedrooms, how it's the key demand for any type of real estate market. Let's talk about the one bedrooms or the two bedrooms that are, smaller, whatever the case is. Okay. So this here is again year over year, and I put here at the top surprised by Fort Myers because for all the stuff that I've talked about Lehigh, Fort Myers came out ahead and not necessarily in a category that you want to. So what we did was with this analysis is I said, listen, let's take a look at $1,500 or less. It doesn't matter what the market is. It doesn't matter what the property looks like. One bedroom, two bedroom, three bedrooms, six bedrooms, whatever a consumer can get for $1,500 or less. What is the number that they can get? So very similar to three-bedroom homes that you can rent for $1,700 or less. I was looking at it, hey, forget the three bedrooms. What can you get economically at the lower end of the market? So in Naples, you can see there were six properties, $1,500 or less, increased by 6 to 12 year over year. And then I also, this next column is, well, what's the cheaper rate, right? So a year ago it was $1,450, and now you can get something for $1,195, okay? So again, a different metric to look at. Bonita Springs, they had one property for $1,500 or less. It was at $1,450 a year ago today. Now it's up to four, and it's down to $1,000. The cheapest one you can get was $1,000. Okay, so again, not much swing. But here's Fort Myers. Fort Myers takes the cake. You had 60 properties, 1,500 or less that you can rent. The lowest being 900. Now it's at 160 properties. 160 properties doubled, right? So increased by 100. That's what the delta is, or the change. So what does this mean for city of Fort Myers? So we have, say, people that have multifamilies in Fort Myers, or condos in Fort Myers, and so forth. And sometimes they're one bedroom, sometimes they're smaller, two bedrooms. What does that mean? There's a lot of competition, because when you go from 60 properties for 1,500 or rent, and you go to 160 properties, what that's saying is that not everybody's obviously hovering around at the 1499 breaking point. They're coming down to the 1,300, the 1,200, the 1,000, that sort of stuff. In fact, I saw, just to let you know, prior to doing this, because I always like looking at providing information for you guys, actual stuff. Right now, there was a two-bedroom, a bath, single-family home, a small one, for $895. So they would be included here in this 160. Okay, so when I say that you can get 160 properties for less than 1,500, some of them were 895. I had a one bedroom. If I were looking at one bedroom apartments, 1,000. Okay, so I said, forget about single family homes, townhomes, and all that sort of stuff. What about apartments? If you have $1,000, okay, what can you do with $1,000, including of apartments? I could ask guys, how much you think, or how many properties you could get in the chat. And Parrish, I don't know if I can hold on to this. I'll tell you what, for those of you that are watching this live, okay, and I'll tell you the number, but for $1,000 rent, how many one bedroom apartments do you think you can get in Fort Myers? I'm not talking Southwest Florida, Fort Myers area. Okay, so I'm going to tell you as I go through this, and then you guys can maybe take a guess as a kind of a game show type of thing. And I don't know, maybe we'll do something for somebody that's the closest here. Okay, so how many one bedroom apartments or homes or whatever you like to think of? How many apartments, say $1,000 or less, are in the Fort Myers area? Not Cape Coral, not Lehigh, Port Charlotte, Naples, or Bonita Springs. Okay, I'll tell you that answer in a second. All right, Cape Coral go from 51 properties to 133. They were second most. So again, you go from 51 properties to 133, an increase of 82 year over year. Lehigh Acres, 29 properties for rent, 1,500. They increased, like I expected them to 109. So they kind of came in, kind of in line with Cape Coral. A little bit surprising, because remember, Cape Coral, there was some shrinkage going on with the three bedrooms. Nothing in Lehigh, but Lehigh kind of like matched Cape Coral in terms of the number of properties that are cheap that you can rent. And then Port Charlotte, kind of interesting again, 14 in June of 2025. It moved up to 38 in June of 2026 for 24 um, changes. So again, Port Charlotte's kind of stabilizing, and we're going from that. So let me see here. So the number, okay, Robert, thank you. I just saw your number, 16. That would probably be pretty normal. For those of you who didn't play, because maybe you didn't want to get called out or something like that. The number of one-bedroom apartments that you can get for $1,000, and probably not much less, but $1,000 a month rent is 86. 86. So when you're sitting with a multifamily or a condo, one bedroom, one bath type of thing, 86 properties you can get for $1,000 a month or less. So good. Thank you, Richard. Uh, Paris, take note that Richard was the one that was the closest to that answer. So we'll think about doing something for Richard. Okay. So thank you, Richard. So 86 properties. Now, what does Red Fortress actually see right now? So is everything doom and gloom, Michael? You've talked a lot about a lot of numbers. What are we actually seeing as one of the larger management companies in Southwest Florida? So again, I share this data freely. So when we're looking here, you're looking at the number of applications. Here's where we are in 2026. You can see that in May and June, we had 22. We matched last year's, exceeded the year before by two. Okay. And then obviously we beat 2024, which was a little bit of a down year. And 2023 was a big year for a lot of reasons. Again, we had Hurricane Ian that happened. So there was a lot of things that were happening, homes that were flooded, people moving around. So 2023 is a little bit of a different year. So, and already for the month of July, I did not update that. This was as of a couple of days ago. We already had 11 move-ins scheduled for the month of July. Okay, so excuse me, we already had, I'm sorry, 11 applications. I'm sorry. So these are the number of applications. We already had 11 as of, so we had like one a day basically in the month of July. And that's affected what I wanted to say next, the number of move-ins. So for the month of July already, we're at 12 move-ins. And some of those move-ins, by the way, might be like August 1st. But again, we're doing all the work in July. So we have like 12 people scheduled to move in either July 1st all the way up to probably August 1st. Anything past that, we're not going to include it in this reference. But that was, a person moving in a day for every day all the way up to like a couple of days ago. All right. Last month we had 14 move-ins, which was the most outside of January of 2026. It was the most in a year. So again, we're seeing a lot of applications coming in. We're seeing a lot of move-ins coming in. So again, if your property is not moving, I can understand that you don't really care about these numbers, but from a Red Fortress perspective, we're seeing like a lot of activity. We're seeing, like, for instance, in Lehigh, we actually, I think, in Parish, maybe correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I could have sworn that we rented 4 properties already. We had like 12, and we're down to 8 or something. Am I right on that?
Yeah, Daniel is in Lehigh is having the best interaction right now, especially with the new software we have in place with getting leads. So as long as your property is in the right price range, we're renting it out. Just
Absolutely.
make sure it's priced right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Parish. And again, one of the things that I asked Parrish for, because this is a lot more in his realm, but he's the one that's working with the property managers on the integration of the new software that we brought in. I'm going to show you that in a second. But so Parrish is really the guy that's seeing the interaction of applications and texts and everything else like that. It's a little bit of an involved system. But basically, as Parrish just said astutely, if your property is priced right, things are going to move. And one of the things that I bring up was something that happened with Don. He had a client that had their property on the market for 60 days, and he said, "Listen, okay, I get it. It's a slow market. I'm done playing around. What should I rent it for?" He told him what to rent it for, and it rented in 5 days. That's one of the 12 that happened. So when we're telling you what we think we can rent it for, this is not something that's made up. It's a lot of data. It's a lot of what a software is telling us. And we're trying to obviously get your property rented to help you financially with that. Now, we're not interested in blowing things out the door because we don't want that to happen either. As a landlord, I have a property that's coming up for a rent, I think maybe even this week. And I'm going to price it where I think it's going to rent. And if it doesn't rent, then I'm going to be reducing it because I don't like vacancies. A lot of things happen with vacancies, not just lost rent, but I have to pay more for the utilities. I have to pay, say, for lawn care, all kinds of different things that can happen with a vacant unit. So having said that, and I'm going to keep pushing on here, and then I'll take questions probably at the end. But I wanted to talk to you a bit right now in the final stages of what we're doing with our online marketing and what Zillow's doing. And it's very interesting. Zillow started to change the game a bit because they're trying to consolidate. There's a lot of lawsuits. Again, I talked about it with a previous Zoom session. I'm not making any judgments on how lawsuits are going to go and so forth like that. But in other words, when we're looking at things in terms of lawsuits and stuff like that, Zillow has started to change their online marketing, and I just thought I would take a property that we're about to start managing here. With in Cape Coral. And again, this is like a sample listing. It's very, very nice. I couldn't fit everything onto one slide because then it would look like so small that you would need a magnifying glass to see any of the details. But then what I did was I took a picture, I showed you, some of the features and everything else like that. And then here's the important aspect that I want to show you is at the end of it, you'll see that it has the name of the brokerage, okay, but there's no phone number. And so one of the things that's starting to happen is that Zillow, unfortunately, and this is not going to necessarily help you or us, but what it's starting to do increasingly is gatekeep more and more. And what I mean by gatekeeping is holding the information of the end user. They're not showing it to. So in other words, if you're a person that's a client and so forth, and you're looking at this, not a client, I should say, but a consumer, you're like, oh, okay, well, these guys, I don't know if they're legitimate or not. And I guess what I have to do is I have to request a tour or request to apply. Now, I don't even know the percentage. I'm going to say 95% of property managers, literally like us, would never accept a Zillow application or anything else like that. So Zillow is trying to say, hey, listen, you don't know really who you're dealing with. You really can't reach out to them. So you're going to have to go through us. And I can tell you, Zillow's number of listings are going to go down. I already know that property managers don't even advertise with them anymore because of what they're trying to do. And they're trying to basically block the consumer from trying to talk with us. So, really interesting. No numbers. Watermarks are even more important. So, when you go back up here, do you see a watermark that where it can say Red Fortress Property Management? We do. So, at least they can look us up. Um, Also, that you can see that we have a logo as well. So, interesting what Zillow is trying to do. Watermark is equally important for the consumer to break through this and also the branding of things. And so, another aspect that's very important to note is that you won't get that branding and that kind of watermarking to some extent unless you pay more. And that's what Red Fortress does. So, one of the reasons why we rented a property a day in the month of July is because, again, we have increased expenditures that we spend on online advertising for Zillow, Trulia, and Hot Pads, as well as apartments and homes.com. Another thing that's happening for the end user or consumer, and I thought I would show you, is that daily Zillow is sending them listings. So they might be looking at your listing or somebody else's, and all of a sudden they go, "Oh, by the way, price cut on this rental property." And they say, "Oh, it used to be 2,500, now it's 2,300." So I get these because I do a lot of research on the market, but this is happening literally every day. Every day. In fact, I said to Parrish, I said I'm going to cut out the number of slides because I can list a dozen slides. Here's another one. I just stopped at two for you guys, but again, they'll say previous 2,400, 2,200 now, and it'll say in the line like price cut of $200. So, when you're looking at people that have multifamily, when you're looking at people that are in duplexes and they say, well, I don't want the person next door to know how much the actual listing is for the new rental rate because it's lower. Like maybe the guy, rented the property at 1,500. Now you're advertising for 1,400 or 1,300. Well, it's increasingly harder and harder to hide that fact, not only because it's online, but because people like Zillow are actively putting in people's faces unless you unsubscribe to this stuff. Okay, so how does Red Fortress kind of handle this? How is it that we're becoming very effective at renting properties? There's a lot of things that go into it. Like I said, the increased marketing, but this is a little bit more where Parish comes in with our new system that's less than I think 30 days old, if I recall. Parish, is that about right?
Yeah. We've had a system that did the same things, but the switching to rent engines got us a lot more data on the applicants and the leads.
Right. Okay. Cool. So, right. So just to give you a little bit of what we're looking at, and this is a bit what we see on our end. You see kind of like these hits of people looking at. I call it hits because they're not necessarily going to see properties. But then one of the big things that will happen, and again, guys, don't start calling people and stuff like that. But we just wanted to show you that with the AI that we're starting to use the rent engine, and we fill out like information and stuff like that. Excuse me, is that it's answering back to people live, like, hey, listen, if you want to see this property, do we have questions? So it's not necessarily waiting for human interaction. It also pings people after a day or so and says, hey, listen, guys, by the way, we haven't heard from you for the last day or 2 days. Are you still interested in this property and so forth? And then it can show like all the properties that the person might be interested in and that sort of stuff. And then like again, it's a little bit more descriptive in terms of like what the amenities are for your rental property, and there's a lot more information than condo type and stuff like that. There's a lot of questions that we could do in vetting a tenant. I know that, or a prospective tenant. I know that Parrish was working on this in terms of like for some people saying, "Hey, listen, let's find some information that's like just informal or informational only, not necessarily blocking people from like getting automatically denied. So a case in point could be something like if somebody had a bankruptcy, you might say, well, let me know informationally whether you've had a bankruptcy, and then we're going to follow you up. Because it could be like 10 years ago, it might not matter versus it could be a year ago. And what we're doing with these like a more robust filtration system is getting information and not necessarily blocking people because to be honest with you, it's a down market. And we want to certainly always try to offer fairness to people. If somebody can have a bankruptcy because of a divorce and it's explained in a certain way that might be a lot more palatable for us and for you guys as clients to rent to somebody, just like somebody that might have a criminal situation. There could be a reason why something happened, and we want to like again give the individual the ability to express themselves and let us know what happened and not just automatically deny them. We don't do that. We look at it at an individual basis, right? And then also some of the just following up with some more slides. We're just showing some stuff here where you can see where we can track where the leads are coming from. Zillow was the biggest one, followed by Realtor. But in all fairness, I think it's actually apartments.com because there was a glitch where some of the data didn't transfer over to apartments.com the right way when we switched over to Rent Engine. I think it was about 3 or 4 days. And so this number for this time frame, this is like less than 2 weeks. Is actually like probably higher. So when you see like 170 hits in 2 weeks, that's showing you a little bit about what's happening on the back end and how we're getting a lot of hits. And what the system is trying to do is trying to match what the people want, following up, not even asking us. And by the way, we can send manual text messages. And I know like people like Ed do that. One of our property managers, I think, who's on the session, learning about the data and stuff like that. Right. Like they're replying to messages. So if there's something that the AI is about to say that's kind of, off or weird or something like that, they'll get involved with directly. Like, we had a situation with one of Ed's rental properties where somebody said, well, you know what, I'm not going to apply because it says no pets. And, so what Ed did was he went to one of our clients and said, hey, listen, I had somebody who was kind of interested in your property. You sure you don't want to have any pets? And they were like, well, no, small dogs and cats might be fine. I'm just concerned if they have some type of, huge animal like a rhinoceros or something like that, and I don't want anything like that. So Ed, went back to the person, talked to the person, and updated stuff, and that's what we mean by obviously we can send text messages as well. And then finally, some of the things that you guys are should be getting on a weekly basis. I think now it happens in the morning as opposed to last month or two where you were getting it like later on at night, like say 10 o'clock Eastern. I think it's now more so 10 o'clock a.m. Coinciding with our kind of staff meeting ending, is this type of thing where like how long is it on the days on market? What are the active prospects occurring? How many upcoming showings? And you can kind of see this funnel. They do it graphically where they're saying, hey, there's 11 people were kind of interested. Four people kind of like expressed little bit more interested in just kicking the tires. They're active prospects, and then upcoming showings you'll see one, and it kind of goes down to eventually like applications and so forth. And then it also shows the prospective source. Again, a lot of it's coming from Zillow. But here's the thing: a lot of our property managers say that when they try to reach out to people from Zillow, again, there's gatekeeping. You can't get through to the person. The email addresses are bonkers, like 72 characters in length. So sometimes they kind of wonder whether there's a little bit of bots that are going on and just like not actual leads. And so one of the things that we do as well from a property management perspective, and people can go in and do this, is like I'll show you something from the data from apartments.com. Apartments.com, this is a lot of data here, but it shows our properties, the date, and this is over like kind of like a just like about a 2 week period. You see all the people's information, the move-in dates that they're requesting, the rental listings and so forth, like reasons for moving. And we can get this through apartments.com. The apartments.com data doesn't have as many weird like email addresses, and anyways, it's a lot more accurate. So we can actually get into the apartments.com data and homes.com data and actually reach out to the people, which is what we do. So if we don't do it through a system like this, and we're following up with AI, we also have the ability to get all this data and email and phone call people out or text them and see what's happening. Because again, we want obviously to rent properties to qualified renters. That's why we're here. We want to rent your property. So a lot of data, a lot of data. So now you guys have survived to the end. Congratulations. Any questions for me? Again, as always, you can always email me, mike@redfortresspm.com. People do with their questions on rentals. But if there's something that you see tonight, anything at all before we sign off for the evening?
I've given everyone the ability to unmute themselves. So if you guys want to unmute yourself and ask a question to Michael, you can go for it.
Excellent, excellent. And Parrish, what are your thoughts on the new system too from your end as an operational manager? Do you like the new system?
Yeah, great with the leads. Yeah, way better than our previous system. So, and we're seeing, yeah, like I said, Daniel out in Lehigh is getting overwhelmed. He said there's too many leads coming in. So
We were laughing at that.
that's a good thing to hear.
Exactly. He's texting a lot, right? So any questions from everybody else here attending for the seminar? Again, I appreciate your time. A lot of thought and research goes into this. Obviously, you can see I do a lot of paring down of the information, but I try to make it relevant and fresh for you guys and changing it each time we have these Zoom sessions. I might do some more Zoom sessions, but not on rental analysis, but on a couple of other areas and really trim it down for you guys. But you guys let me know what you're thinking. So, any final questions before we sign off? Richard, and
Look, looks like we're clear.
looks like we're clear. All right, guys. Well, I hope this has been informative to you. I hope you've learned some stuff. I certainly enjoyed watching some of the numbers come in and go, wow, that was a little bit surprising about Fort Myers or Cape Coral or Lehigh. So who knows what's going to happen over the next quarter? All I know is that we're looking at renting more properties, and we've been doing well in June and July. So I hope it continues for the rest of July and into August. So if you have any questions, reach out to your property manager, to me, and have a great rest of the evening. Thanks, guys. Take care.